You know, every single year, universities get just buried under thousands and thousands of student comments. I mean, it's a gold mine of data, right? Stuff that could totally change education for the better. But there's a huge problem. How do you even begin to sort through all of it? Well, we're going to look at a brand new framework that does something amazing. It doesn't just read the words, it actually understands the feelings behind them.
And that really brings up a big question, doesn't it? With all this data coming in, are we truly listening to students, or are we just kind of skimming the surface, missing all the important stuff, the emotion, the real meaning that's hidden between the lines?
All right, so let's get into the weeds here. The real challenge is just how hard it is to make sense of this mountain of feedback. I mean, if you try to do it by hand, it would take forever. And the old computer-based methods, well, they've got some pretty major blind spots.
So here's the deal with the old ways of doing things. You've got these methods like TF-IDF, which are basically just really fancy word counters. And yeah, they're good at telling you which words pop up the most, but they have zero clue about emotional context. They can't tell the difference between someone saying a class was good and someone saying it was not good. And you know, that's a pretty huge problem when you're trying to figure out how students actually feel.
And honestly, this is a gap that researchers have been banging their heads against for years. The source paper for this explainer puts it perfectly, saying that the existing systems, they just don't capture the subtleties of emotion in student feedback. The old tools are just too clumsy to pick up on what's really being said.
So what's the solution? How do we actually fix this? Well, a team of researchers came up with a new, much smarter approach. It's designed from the ground up to get past these old problems and give us a much, much deeper understanding.
Enter the Student Sentiment from Feedback Framework, or SSF for short. Now, think of this thing as a super specialized tool. It wasn't built just to read words on a page. It was built to understand the feelings and the core themes behind those words, and it does it with amazing accuracy.
So how does it work? It's basically a four-step process. First, it cleans up all the messy text. Then comes the really cool part, the most innovative step, feature selection. We're going to focus on that in a second. After that, it classifies the feedback as positive, negative, or neutral. And finally, it figures out the main themes that students are actually talking about.
Okay, so what is this magic? The real secret sauce is in that second step I mentioned, feature selection. This is where the SSF framework completely breaks away from the old models and does something totally new.
It all comes down to a hybrid approach. See, instead of choosing between counting words or analyzing emotion, this framework basically says, why not do both? And it doesn't stop there.
So for the first part, it actually uses that old school method, TF-IDF. Remember the sophisticated word counter? This gives the model a solid foundation. It helps it figure out what topics students are talking about the most just based on word frequency.
But here's where it gets smarter. It adds a whole second layer of analysis using something called SentiWordNet. And you can just think of this as an emotion dictionary. For pretty much every word, it assigns a score for how positive, negative, or neutral it is. So if TF-IDF tells the system what students are talking about, this layer tells it how they feel about it.
And it gets even better. The model is also trained to spot intensifiers, words like very, extremely, or awfully that really dial up the emotion. It also understands how words connect in a sentence, so it knows that absolutely hate is way stronger than just hate. And maybe most importantly, it gets negation, so it finally solves that whole good versus not good puzzle.
So the big takeaway here? The real breakthrough isn't just one of these individual pieces. It's how they're all fused together. By combining word frequency with this really deep emotional and grammatical context, the model gets a much, much richer and more accurate picture of what each student is actually trying to say.
Of course, a new idea is great, but the real question is, does it actually work? So the researchers put it to the test. They took their new hybrid approach and put it head-to-head with the old methods, using a real-world set of student feedback.
And the results were, well, pretty stunning. Just look at this. The old methods, like TF-IDF, were getting it right about 76% of the time. Another one, called Bag of Words, was even worse, down at 66%. But the new method, it jumped all the way up to an average accuracy of over 93%. That is a massive, massive improvement.
But get this, it gets even crazier. When they paired this new framework with certain machine learning models, like a decision tree or an SVM, it achieved a perfect accuracy score, 1.0. That means it got every single piece of feedback right. That's practically unheard of in this field.
So, okay, a perfect score is impressive, but what does it actually mean? What can you do with it?
Well, this is where it gets really powerful. It lets us go way beyond just a bunch of data points and start finding real, actionable insights about what the student's experience is actually like.
Check this out. This is the kind of clarity we're talking about. The framework automatically sorts the feedback into these clear themes. So, for positive comments, you see the theme as classroom experience and academic support, with words like learn, help, recommend. Makes sense. But then for the negative feedback, you get challenges and dissatisfaction, with words like fail, worst, and confusing. All of a sudden, an administrator can see crystal clear what's working and what is definitely not.
And that is the whole point. This is why this all matters so much. The researchers themselves say it. With this kind of detailed insight, schools can create targeted interventions. In other words, they can fix the specific things that students are complaining about, and they can do more of the stuff that students love. And that leads directly to better student engagement and ultimately better success.
So this all leaves us with a really fascinating thought, right? What we have here is a technology that lets us listen to students with a kind of clarity and empathy that's never really been possible before. So the question is, if we can finally understand what students need this clearly, what does that mean for the future of learning? Just imagine the kind of responsive, supportive, and truly effective education we could build.